Welcome back to Commander's Report, News and Rumours, the spot where all the NFL noise gets filtered down to what actually matters for Washington's fan base. Today, March 31st, 2026, this episode kicks off with a signing that looks small on paper, but opens up a huge conversation about Daron Payne and the future of the interior defensive line. From there, we dive straight into the hottest debate right now. What does Adam Peters do with pick number 7, Carnell Tate or Mansour Delane? And we wrap with something that has been an emotional loose end for Washington fans for years. The new uniforms and what Josh Harris just revealed about where the design is headed. 3 different topics, one single conversation. Let's roll. The Commanders just signed DJ Davidson, 6 feet 3 inches, 320 pounds, former defensive tackle for the Giants. 5th rounder in 2022, 4 years in New York playing behind Dexter Lawrence, which means basically invisible in terms of real snaps, an ACL injury in the rookie year, and the 2025 season cut short early by neck issues and a concussion. This is not a name that is going to move the market. Adam Schefter confirmed it on X, and that was pretty much all the noise this news made nationally. So why are we talking about this today? Because the Davidson signing cannot be read in a vacuum. To understand why it matters, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, Daron Payne. Payne signed a 4-year, $90 million deal before the 2023 season. That contract came after a 2022 year where Payne was absolutely dominant. 11.5 sacks, Pro Bowl, the kind of production that justifies that level of investment. The issue is that since signing that contract, Payne has a total of 11 sacks. 11 sacks over 3 full seasons, and the PFF grade has not cleared 61.5 in any of those 3 years. For a 28-year-old who is chewing up that chunk of cap, those numbers are tough to defend. And it is not just about individual production. Washington finished the 2025 season ranked 31st in EPA per play allowed. 31st. That is not only a coordinator or scheme problem. Even though the switch to Daron Jones is a real variable, it is also a talent problem up front. And when there are 2 big money deals on the interior, Payne with $90 million and Javon Kinlaw with $45 million over 3 years, and the collective output of that unit is not where it has to be, the trade conversation becomes inevitable. Bleacher Report did not dance around it. Payne was listed as the #1 trade target for the Packers this offseason. The reasoning adds up. Green Bay is missing Kenny Clark, needs an experienced interior disruptor, and Payne, even in decline, still has that physical profile and name recognition the Packers tend to like. PFF pointed it out too. If Washington wants to free up cap space and go get younger upgrades, moving Payne makes sense from a front office perspective. Now, does that trade actually make sense for Washington? The pros are pretty straightforward. You free up meaningful cap, you get out of a contract that is not delivering the expected return on investment, and you potentially bring back picks that give more ammo to build the roster. Payne has 1 more year left on the deal after this one. If there is no plan to extend, and based on the production, what would the case be? What you really have is basically a 1-year rental at a franchise tag price. That is not sustainable. There are cons too. Daron Jones is coming in with a fresh defensive vision, and there are plenty of cases where players have bounced back under new leadership and a different scheme. Nobody knows yet exactly how Jones wants to deploy the interior tackles. If the system needs a physical 2-tech who can eat blocks and free up linebackers, Payne can still be useful in that role. Shipping Payne out before seeing how the fit looks with Jones could end up being a premature mistake. My read on it, it feels like Peters is checking every option. The Davidson signing is not some 1-for-1 replacement for Payne. That would be ridiculous. It is more a signal that the team is building cheap depth while it sorts out what to do with the big-ticket deals. It is the kind of front office move that basically says, we are covering all the bases. Tim Settle fits that logic too. A vet who understands the job, can generate pressure efficiently when on the field, and does not cost an arm and a leg. What happens with Payne over the next few weeks is going to say a lot. If a trade pops before the draft, that tells us a ton about the direction Peters wants to take this defense. If Payne is still in Washington after Pittsburgh, the plan is probably to give him one more year under Jones and see if there is a revival. What would you do if you were Peters? If the Packers put a reasonable set of picks on the table for Payne, are you pulling that trigger? Or are you giving Payne a shot under the new coordinator? Drop it below, because this decision has more impact on the 2026 roster than most people are accounting for. All right, let's park the interior line for a second, because there is something way more urgent on the calendar. A little under 4 weeks until the draft in Pittsburgh, and there are two names completely dominating the conversation for pick number 7. This is what has been stuck in my head all week, and any Commanders fan who is really tracking the draft closely is probably in the same place. Adam Peters holds pick 7. There is a list of 5 or 6 serious candidates, according to the draft analysts, and there are two names sitting at the center of the loudest debate right now: Carnell Tate, wide receiver from Ohio State, and Mansour Delane, cornerback from LSU. Both are legit for that spot. Both represent completely different philosophies for how to build this team. And that is exactly what makes this such a tough, and honestly, such a fun conversation. Let's start with Tate. Carnell Tate, WR, Ohio State, 6 feet 2 inches, 192 pounds, and coming out of the most reliable wide receiver factory in college football over the last decade. Brian Hartline, the Ohio State receivers coach, has sent Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka into the first round, all first-round guys over the last 3 or 4 drafts. And before all of them, there was Terry McLaurin. That is the tree Tate comes from. And Terry is living proof that Hartline knows exactly what is being built in that receiver room. The argument against Tate always starts in the same place: the 4.53 at the combine. That is not slow in absolute terms, but when people picture a first-round receiver who is supposed to be a real deep threat in the NFL, the numbers in mind are 4.3, maybe mid, 4.4 at worst. Tate is not there, and that triggers the obvious question: can Tate be a real deep threat without elite speed? The film says yes, and David Harrison from Sports Illustrated boils it down pretty well when saying Tate is honestly the best fit for this team right now. Tate does not need Tyreek Hill's speed to win deep. What Tate has is something a lot of burners never really develop: understanding of the play before the route even starts. Tate plays with tempo, angles, jab steps, small setup moves at the line to cause problems for the corner before the route even gets rolling. When you watch Tate's deep touchdowns at Ohio State, you are not seeing someone just mash the gas and run past everybody. You are watching a receiver who set up the win 4 steps before. That has real value in the NFL, and it meshes with a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, who can make quick decisions and needs receivers who create windows, not just sprinters waiting on a bomb. The current roster context makes the case for Tate even stronger if you look at it from the offensive side. Washington tried in free agency to land Alec Pierce and Romeo Doubs, struck out on both. That leaves Daniels with McLaurin as the true number 1 on the outside, and not much else that actually scares opposing defensive coordinators. A receiver like Tate, schemed up the right way, running sharp routes, with a quarterback who trusts the reads, might be exactly the secondary weapon Daniels needs to make a real leap in year 2. Surrounding a franchise quarterback with talent is always a smart investment. At the core, the argument for Tate is an argument of faith in Jaden Daniels and an investment in this offense. If there is belief that Daniels can drive this franchise for the next 8 years, then giving Daniels weapons has to be the priority. But then there is the other name, Mansour Delane, CB, LSU. The argument for Delane starts with that number mentioned earlier that cannot be brushed aside: 31st in EPA per play allowed. Washington was one of the worst defenses in the entire league last season. And after seeing Marshawn Lattimore and Jonathan Jones leave in the offseason, with the biggest cornerback move being Armick Robertson, a solid player, but nobody is calling Emeka shutdown corner, the need at that position is flat out urgent. Delane is the consensus top corner in this draft. Matt Miller from ESPN made that pretty clear in the most recent mock, slotting Delane to Washington at 7, even with players like David Bailey, Ruben Bain Jr. and Sonny Styles still on the board. The reasoning was that Delane can be the kind of shutdown presence Washington needs to take the defense up a tier. The college numbers back up that hype. In Delane's last season at LSU, only 10 catches were allowed for 119 yards on 36 targets. That is a ridiculously low success rate for receivers trying to go after Delane. 2 interceptions, an intimidating presence across the entire side of the field Delane was responsible for. And all of that in the SEC, which is nowhere near a practice squad conference. Delane is the kind of corner quarterback circle on the game plan board and then just decide to attack the other side. That has a multiplier effect on the entire defense. When there is a corner who can effectively lock down one side of the field, the rest of the defensive resources, the safeties, the other corner, the linebackers in coverage, can be deployed more efficiently. Delane is the type of player who makes everyone around better. Washington Commanders defense, Daron Jones, 2026. This is where Daron Jones becomes a huge factor. The new defensive coordinator is bringing in a personal vision of what this unit should look like. If that system needs an elite outside corner who can live on an island against top receivers without constant safety help, Delane is not just a fit. Delane is the kind of foundational piece that lets Jones design everything else with real freedom. That is different from simply plugging a positional hole. That is building from a strength. Mike Sainristil put together a solid season. Trey Amos is rehabbing well. Amos even said on an Instagram live this week that the leg is feeling good and he is already working again. But neither has Delane's profile. The team could easily roll with all three. Delane as the #1 outside corner, with Sainristil and Amos handling the other roles in the secondary. My personal stance, being totally upfront, my first instinct was Tate. Daniels needs weapons. That is always going to be true. But the more I sat with that 31st in EPA, the fact that 2 starting corners walked in the offseason, and the reality that Daron Jones is going to need real talent to make the scheme go, something shifted. What really clicked was the realization that Washington's defensive deficit is not cosmetic. It is structural. And structural problems do not get fixed simply by changing the coordinator. Nobody truly knows the right answer yet. Honestly, it feels like not even Peters has it locked down right now. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this pick one of the most fascinating decisions in the entire draft. If the draft were tomorrow and both were sitting there at 7, what is your move? Are you giving Daniels another weapon with Tate? Or are you locking down the defense with Delane and trusting the offense has enough of a base to grow? Hit the comments, because it is genuinely interesting to see how Washington fans are processing this dilemma. And while that draft debate keeps running in the back of the mind, there is another topic that has been an emotional loose end for this fan base for years, something not tied to picks or contracts, but to identity. And this week, Josh Harris spoke up. Harris speaks, and the message is clear. On April 15th, the Commanders roll out the new uniforms. The date was already on the calendar. What was not totally clear was the philosophy behind the design. This week, The Athletic ran comments from Josh Harris that paint a pretty specific picture of where this thing is headed. And what Harris said was interesting precisely because it felt personal. Harris did not sound like a corporate exec walking through a marketing decision. Harris talked like someone who actually lived those teams. Harris said being there in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, knowing firsthand what those squads meant, the 3 Super Bowls, the identity that franchise carried, and that the weight of that history matters, not only for the old school fans, but for millions of people who associate that look with the best moments Washington has ever had as a football team. The key line was straight to the point. I do not want to ruin the surprise, but we are going to continue to go back and try to embrace our past, but then update it. Washington Commanders Super Bowl era uniforms Burgundy Gold, 1980s throwback. That already tells us quite a bit. The reference point is the Super Bowl era uniforms, basically replicas of the 80s and early 90s sets, with minor tweaks so they fit modern bodies and modern materials. What is coming now looks like an evolution of that path. More faithfulness to the past, more historical weight, with the small details updated the way the modern game demands. And honestly, I like it more than expected when the new uniform talk started a few months back, when the team changed the name and tried to build the Commander's identity from scratch. There was a stretch where the aesthetic felt a little disconnected. The first Commander's era uniforms were not terrible, but they did not carry the same visual weight as the Riggins teams, the Doug Williams teams, the Mark Ripien Super Bowl group. They did not scream, "This is Washington," and Washington has history. Harris seems to get that the emotional connection to the past is not just nostalgia, it is brand identity. The people who lived those Super Bowls or inherited them through parents or grandparents want to feel like today's team is the same franchise, not identical, but connected. And the aesthetic is one of the easiest ways to build that bridge. If they nail that deep burgundy and that old-school gold from that era, with modern fabrics and a current cut that fits today's players, Washington might end up with something that hits on multiple levels, a nod to the past, a strong present-day identity, and a look fans will want to wear inside the new stadium that is on the way. Speaking of the stadium, Harris confirmed it is fully on track. Construction on infrastructure is starting soon. Vertical construction projected for around this time next year. On top of that, there are $25 million additional dollars going into upgrades for the current stadium in Landover and the practice facility in Ashburn, on top of the more than $100 million already invested. Harris did not sugarcoat a thing. Obviously, we did not inherit a great situation there. No spin, no dancing around it. Ironically, that kind of honesty builds more trust than if Harris tried to paint everything as perfect. Josh Harris, Washington Commanders owner, 2026. The bigger picture coming into focus with this ownership group is an organization trying to move forward on several fronts at once. Visual identity, infrastructure, on-field competitiveness. Not every piece is in place yet. That 5-12 record last season is the clearest evidence, but there is at least a direction that makes sense. A question for everyone watching right now. How much do uniforms matter to you as a fan? Does the look really change how you feel about the team? Or at the end of the day, is it just win games and wear whatever? Both answers are valid, and it would be good to read where you land in the comments, looking at these three storylines together and what they say about where this team stands right now. The picture that comes to mind is an organization in a real transition, not just in press conferences, but through actual moves. Peters is handling tough contracts with a smart approach, building cheap depth while weighing bigger decisions. The draft is closing in with one of the most debated picks in the entire first round. And ownership is putting real money into the fan experience and the visual identity while the new stadium slowly comes to life. Is it enough to get back to being competitive in 2026 after that 5-12 faceplant? That is still an open question. Last season was a punch in the mouth, and those punches hurt even if they wake you up. What can be said right now is that the organization does not look asleep anymore. Peters has to hit in Pittsburgh. That pick 7 cannot be a whiff, and Daron Jones has to show that this defense can do more than what it put on tape last year. For the first time in a while, though, there are actual reasons to keep watching. Not to relax and fall asleep on the couch, but to stay locked in. And in Washington, that already counts for something. If you made it this far, you are one of the folks who truly lives this team. The off-season, the draft debates, the contracts, the whole roller coaster. Drop in the comments who your pick at 7 is, whether you move Payne or not, and what you are expecting from the new uniforms. And if you want to ride this thing with me all the way to Pittsburgh, you already know the deal. Hit subscribe, and I will catch you on the next Commanders Report.